The sole significant distinction between him and Basil was little and possessed airily big henpecking wife. John Clay developed a persona in 1975, so infuriating BBC management were concerned about it would put a stop to his career. The proprietor of the Hotel Wo struck his staff and who walked around words used by Germans that made actors sob when the video was being shot. However, the most sinister aspect tweezed what the audience observed. What was it? Occurred when the cameras, Caesar drolling, a single actor found themselves in the hospital. Another ran away to become a therapist. Additionally, 45 years later, streaming the episode was eventually removed by services. Went too far. You'll be shocked to learn why. The Monty Python team in May 1970 made their reservation at the Glen Eagles Hotel in Oak, anticipating a peaceful 3-week stay. As an alternative, they entered actual scary program hosted by a man named Sinclair Donald. He served in the Navy before, an officer with 2 shipwreck survivals, but wasn't able to manage guests during pupilessing a tea order. Later, John Clay nicknamed him "You've never encountered a more impolite dude." Additionally, that wasn't a hyperbole. Sinclair's strange behavior started nearly as soon as Eric Idle departed his in the lobby as a briefcase. Sinclair developed suspicious the alarm clock on it was ticking. He thought there was a bomb inside. Thus, no rational hotelier would have done what he did. He took hold of the container and threw it out the window. Some even asserted that he tossed it down a precipice. But his wife subsequently aided to refute that by saying, "There are not close to the hotel." When questioned about why who would blow up a sleepy hotel, "We've had several issues with the staff. That was it." The full Monty Python team was so frightened that after packing, they departed. Aside from Claire, he didn't stay because he liked it, but because he was unable to turn away. He was intrigued by something about Sinclair. This individual who made fun of visitors, policiding customs, and declined to open the midday bar in some way. Felt like comedy gold. Cleese brought his spouse. Returning to the hotel, Connie Booth examined Sinclair as though it were a human science undertaking. He observed him micromanaging tips, preventing visitors from drinking by patrol the dining room and the pool, like a warden in a prison. A single waitress he stopped guests mid-meal, as I recall, to improve their manners at the table. Sinclair dated Americans as well. Terry Gilliam, though the only python available in the United States, was reprimanded for using his fork during meals. Incorrectly. In fact, Sinclair chose a "sorry we don't," he answered, lifting his knife. "Eat as though you were at a British table." National security was the importance of manners. That particular one man's madness served as the basis for Basil is flawed. Cleese didn't simply copy, though Sinclair, he included a darker element himself. Although the program made viewers there was a lot of truth to it. More disturbing later, Connie Booth stated that the Basil's character wasn't solely founded on Sinclair. Additionally, it mirrored Cleese's depths in personality. She talked about writing the show as a form of treatment, and it clarifies a lot, particularly when you observe how Manuel, the waiter from Spain, received treatment. Sax's Andrew, who performed, had left Nazi Germany when he was a little boy. He portrayed the naive character in the show. Basil continuously mistreated the immigrant, but it wasn't all that behind the scenes performing. In fact, Cleese struck him during at one point, Sax has recalled. "He beat me so I was unable to get up after falling hard. He was scorched by the impact of chemical smoke. Hit with a metal pot rather than a rubber one." Additionally, when he requested, Ankles told him to put himself together and apologized, gathered and gave him a drink. Rather, Kelsey's explosive actions Western novel. When he was Monty Python years, hostilities became so severe that Terry Jones once hurled a typewriter in his direction. On Tower Defects, the same requirement for everything was driven by control. He created everything. The casting decisions were overturned. Producers and Basil was in charge of the set. Oversaw the hotel. It was cruelly ironic. He had evolved into the persona he created. For Connie, the strain was even more intense. Booth, as the first season was being filmed in 1975, she remained married to Cleese. By the 1979's second season, there were no one on site knew that she was divorced. They pretended if nothing was wrong. Booth later gave up acting and became into a psychotherapist, who claimed that the program had been a means of addressing Kelsey's shortcomings. She suppressed her rage and grief, becoming Polly, the cool, rational voice amidst the confusion. That persona turned into her channel. Then Prunella appeared. Sybil Fawlty was played by Scales. Kels made her to symbolize the type of he feared, becoming an overbearing wife. Imprisoned within a particular episode. Sybil's age is 34 according to medical records, but when it was filmed, Scales was 43. She made a joke about Sybil only getting married to Basil. Due to the fact that his family was more a social scale compared to hers. The entire character made fun of insecurity in class and perhaps at Claire's own disintegrating. The darkest casting in the show nonetheless. Ballard Barkley made the decision. As Gowan, Major Claire's desired a person who might recite racist statements without skirming. Born in 1904, Berkeley possessed the look for an old colonial fossil on the right. In one notorious scene, the main character employs racist epithets to characterize cricket teams. That was pushing it even in 1975, when in September Fawlty Towers debuted. It didn't set the globe on fire on the 19th of 1975. Fire, not even close. The BBC to premiere drew a tiny audience, most people wondering what John Clay might do following Monty Python. However, the detractors weren't impressed. They failed to grasp it. Python's untamed, uncontrolled vitality had been replaced with a sitcom that takes place in a smologing. It was considered dull by some. Some believed it was doomed. Even there were memoranda circulating throughout the BBC. Wondering if the entire would function. However, behind that early bewilderment, something was shifting. Cleese Booth, a co-writer, wasn't only composing a new comedy. What they were doing something quite different. Quicker conversation, deeper personalities and more precise editing. It wasn't evident right away, but once his viewers started to realize that it was an electric reaction. This wasn't similar Tony I thing they had before witnessed, and they couldn't stop eating it. The enchantment of Fawlty Towers wasn't limited to what was broadcast, what didn't contain it. Just 12 episodes were ever produced, only 2 seasons. That was it. However, those 12 episodes required 43 a season's worth of work weeks. Each joke, every dispute and every tumultuous situation was planned till the very last minute. Klein infatuated with everything, even small suck as whether Basil and Manuel ought to have grown mustaches. Arguments that go for hours. It's excessive to have 2 mustaches in one frame, he quarreled. However, the meticulousness wasn't only pertaining to humor. Something was there, darker, on the underside. Booth and Cleese were married at the beginning of the show. By in season 2, they were on their way to a separation. The distance between the first 1975's season and 1979's second, it was more than just writing. It was about making it through the process. The program was destroying their bond. In 1978, they formally parted ways. Completing the everything they had was taken away in the final season. Left. Even while the confusion behind these sequences, the show began to accumulate in us. It took home the Best BAFTA award. Comedy that was scripted around 1976 and 1980. At last, the audience understood. Likewise, the critics, however, not all those behind the curtain was having a good time. Andrew Saxwell played Manuel had maintained a gloomy kept a secret for years. 2014 saw him disclose that the show's filming was physically risky for him. Occasionally terrifying. In a particular sequence, Clay was expected to smote him with a frying pan that was softly cushioned. However, on the last take, Clay employed a genuine one. Sax was completely unconscious. He struck me. I was unable to get out of bed. According to Sax, he ultimately suffered burns, bruising, and the physicians cautioned that one injury would leave a permanent scar on him. When Sax questioned Cleese, he didn't receive an apology. Cleese advised him to gather himself and suggested a baby. Jammed him instead. The Saxes received only $700 from the BBC for everything. However, despite everything, the show took the world by storm. By 1976, already, Fawlty Towers was airing. The Netherlands and Sweden. In 1977, I thought television in Australia. By the end of 1978, there were more than a few instances of defective towers, a dozen nations. It was called and translated into languages worldwide. Individuals from various cultural backgrounds, distinct histories and perceptions of everyone was laughing at the same time. Disaster-prone talk hotel owner. In October 24, 1975, something odd occurred on British TV. A Fawlty Towers episode was broadcast. BBC Two was hilarious, but so uneasy that it turned into the greatest, most contentious in the whole series. It was the 6th episode that John wrote. Booth, Clay and Connie. Many referred to it as the masterpiece of the show. However, not all of them were chuckling. From the beginning, it felt distinct rather than the customary opening view of the hotel. Featuring the renowned, the episode started at the scrambled sign London's Northwick Park Hospital. That confused frequent viewers on its own. Additionally, it cost more than previous episodes because Basil's intricate hospital settings and the scene of a meltdown. That response, quiet and strong, established the tone for what was approaching, and then there was anarchy. The episode's halfway point is when things go from strange to ridiculous. Basil, already anxious and recuperating from a concussion, and starts preparing dinner for German visitors to the hotel. In addition, didn't mention, he instructs staff. The war. Naturally, he is unable to halt discussing it. He dismisses conflict, allusions, lapses into Nazi expressions. Anton abruptly changes into Hitler. Indeed, a Basil goose walks about the dining room. Copying and barking in German raids with bombs. It lasted almost 5 minutes. It was raucous, intense and startling. He even invented names for the dishes, similar like a Hermann and Prong Gürtelskering. The most unpleasant aspect. The German, there were no extra guests. They were real German actors. They are appalled. Not every expression was scripted. They were responding to the actual performance. Even one of them began weeping. And finally, following the restaurant has gone insane silently, the German visitor inquires. However, do they succeed? It would be used as a quote for decay. However, none of that was the cause of years later. The episode was cancelled. Rather, the actual issue was caused by an earlier Major Gowan, the character. In the middle of a cenothat had appeared innocuous. The Major starts discussing cricket with Basil. Then he makes a terrible statement. He employs 3 times, not once, the N-word, and additionally he calls Indians a racist slur to participants. It wasn't a joke, it wasn't a word overstated. He was alone, talking as if it were commonplace. Even in 1975 people were in disbelief. Arthur, the actor I loathed, saying the lines, "brew," he required to get through them. It takes multiple takes. The authors stated that their objective was to demonstrate how offensive and out-of-date the Major's opinions were. However, many others sensed it. DN single quotes to matter. Racism, even tomicked it and continued to air it. That one sequence, which lasted just 90 seconds, was subsequently removed from replays. Additionally, in 2020, the entire episode was taken down by UK TV. Through its streaming service. They stated the racial epithets were no longer acceptable. The platform has evolved, and, however, not everyone noticed that. The initial release of Fawlty Towers provided to German media outlets in the BBC omitted this in the early 1990s. Episode. They assumed that German viewers will consider it offensive. However, when German TV networks learned about the missing, they requested it in 1993. In fact, they demanded the BBC provide it, to the surprise of many German viewers about it. They didn't take offense. In actuality, the episode turned into one of the most when it did air. It was well liked. Why? Since they understood the joke. It wasn't making fun of Germans. It was making fun of the British. Individuals specifically, the number of them to hold on to antiquated ideas of Rainer's Basil was not viewed by Germans as a hero, but also a symbol and a walking catastrophe for all the issues with post-war Britain superiority. However, it wasn't the only contentious scenario. Among the most there were unsettling moments from Major, a racist cricket story of Gowan. He employed West Indians are described with the N-word and referred to as Indians W.S. In reruns. That line was eliminated. Beginning in 2013, following conversations with the crew of John Cleese. However, the remainder of the racial insensitivity of the performance persisted unaltered. This was not an isolated incident. Throughout the series, figures from various ethnic backgrounds were employed as simple comedy targets. At any time a non-native English speaker showed up at the hotel, usually, it concluded with some kind of collapse. It wasn't a random act either. It was intentionally written that way. The humor depended on making fun of strangers. Additionally, it wasn't limited to the area. By 1978, 55 broadcasters had purchased the show throughout 17 nations. However, in Spain, it failed miserably. Why? Because viewers they felt insulted by the way the Spanish Manuel, the waiter, received treatment. A few nations even called for modifications to scripts or characters only to create the display arable. It says a lot. This British humor wasn't lost in interpretation. It was content that went too far for viewers worldwide. Manuel Andrew Sachs portrayed the role, and their character turned into one of the most British ethnic stereotypes on Notorious. TV. His English was not very good, always appeared perplexed and was held accountable for everything. However, what audiences did realize, Sachs wasn't simply embarrassed on screen. He was physical illustrate while on camera. Cleese John didn't always pretend to hit or smack. According to Sachs, he once collapsed and was unable to get up following a scene. As he requested, Clay Forkles apologized icily and said, "Pull if you pull yourself together. I'll buy you own more baby cam." And it continued that there. When the Germans were filming, Sachs sustained secondary burns in the episode from an unsuccessful fire stunt. In Anatholsine, a defective prop injured him. Cleese was waving it around at the time. Sachs had survived the war and escaped Nazi Germany as a youngster, and continued to defend the program against allegations of racism while being harmed physically, as well as sunset, emotionally. Manuel was a good-hearted person with good intentions. However, the man of the character was always written grateful for a career that only brought scoring, reflecting the intensity of actual life disparity between Cleese and him. Next, Basil Fawlty himself is present. He wasn't just a hotel manager under stress, he symbolized a really tangible object. A snob who looked down on the laboring class and disparaging anyone who isn't sufficiently British enough money. In the first episode, the other visitors are moved around midway by Basil. Supper to greet a person he believes to be a gentleman. The visitor proves to be a distraction. However, class has blinded Basil too much. Obsession to observe. This wasn't only a humorous exaggeration. It represented the true opinions of John Cleese. His Connie Booth, co-writer and ex-wife, admitted it. Writing the show, she said, was similar to Cleese therapy. And Basil reveled Cleese's personal problems, particularly his animosity against foreign laborers. Basil doesn't merely ridicule them of the working class, he publicly hates them. He summons the striking employees, loiterers, and displays similar to their protester a personal assault on him. Heflinches, when hearing some accents, he believest only concerto and cathedral builders composers are considered authentic Englishmen, that it isn't satire, hatred dressed like thought as a comedy. Although the program made millions of people chuckle at what transpired behind thigh scenes were far from humorous. Andrew Sachs, who played Manuel, wasn't just pretending to get hurt. He was actually getting hit. John Cleese, instead of using props or fake punches, often hit Sachs for real. This happened repeatedly from 1975 to 1979. Cassis later revealed in an interview that off the hits was so hard he collapsed and couldn't get up. And this wasn't just distance. During a rehearsal, Cleese was supposed to whack him with a padded frying pan, but on the day of filming they used a real one. Sachs was knocked down again, and when he encountered Cleese bar afterward, hoping for Ansari, Cleese tossed it aside. His response, "You're not running far in the West End. Gather yourself. Cam. I'll get you another baby." Saxophonist wasn't just struck. Additionally, he was scorched while performing a fire-retardant stunt jacket that broke, leaving a permanent. His arm was scarred. Another scene shows Aladar was inches from his face, and in exchange, what did he receive? Only $700 from the BBC, insufficient to even pay for the medical. As all of this was going on, Cleese was undergoing a covert divorce. With the show's co-writer Connie Bouthan took on the role of Polly. 1968 saw their marriage but separated in 1978. In the midst of season 2 filming, nobody on set knew. Somehow, they continued keeping it a secret from everyone, pretending nothing was different. However, behind the scenes, Cleese said that he was heartbroken. Later on, Booth implied that scripting the show was similar to therapy. Basil, she even said Fawlty's personality mirrored Cleese's actual defects, such as his rage at foreigners. Booth left the stage after the performance. From Cleese in the limelight. She has hardly mentioned Fawlty Towers. Since. However, this wasn't the only location where Cleese lost his temper. His fame followed him to Monty Python. In 2024, Michael Palin disclosed it. Altercation with Terry Jones became so Jones grabbed up a typewriter and heated up. Flung it at Clay across the room. It wasn't a crude drawing. It was a sincere outburst of anger during a real debate about life in the 1970s. Typically the cool one, Jones had arrived at his tipping point. Additionally, that states of everything regarding Cleese's difficulty in collaborating with these altercations weren't uncommon. Either. Palin acknowledged that they did occur frequently, but this one was noticeable. The Cleese environment on the Fawlty not only was the Towers set rough, but it was poisonous. The staff and cast lived in terror. His demonstrated that complaints would be considered serious. If someone like Sachs was unable to receive a sincere apology, what chance does it have after being physically injured? Did anybody else have? People agreed with the maltreatment due to the fact that Clay was the star and co-author. Silence meant power. Like that if you referred to him as a genius. However, behind Thekatane some noticed a lot. Many years later, Cleese would once more allocate himself at the heart of dispute. However, it wasn't this time. Regarding the events that took place on the set, it concerned what was broadcast. On May 25, 2020 in the United States, George Floyd was killed, causing widespread demonstrations throughout the world. In the UK, this sparked intensifying racism in the media. All of a sudden, shows that we're now being re-examined after being neglected. Simply on June 12, 18 days later, UK TV pulled an episode of Fawlty Towers from 1975. The Germans is the title. It featured a scene when the N-word was used by an elderly hotel visitor again and made fun of Indian cricket players. According to the network, included racist epithets and had to be examined. The choice garnered media attention, but it was short-lived. Officers. The reaction was swift and vicious. That he criticized the BBC that same day on claiming on Twitter that the removal was cowardly and without courage. The people running, he remarked. The BBC was once a creator. Now he asserted that everyone was afraid and a marketer. Officials. He defended the idea that the elderly the hotel visitor was obviously a hoax, an old fossil being made fun of. If individuals are too dim to, he wrote, what can one say about that? By less than 24 hours later, the next day, UK TV gave in. The Germans, they said, would come back with a caution regarding full words. It was a beautiful U-turn, but it was too late. The entire situation demonstrated how divided people were. Was Cleese advocating for its satire or defense of the inadmissible? Cleese persisted despite everything. He persisted in his public advocacy against using what he dubbed cancel culture. Incident in which the BBC was attacked after losing its edge. Others, meantime, witnessed it in a different way. Evidence that some types of despite this privilege and power were still quite safe. Scales Prunella, who performs of Old Fault, is considered to be in good standing health, but she is unable to recall anything. Age, they argue. Some mutter that it's anything more profound. Selective amnesia. Next up is Andrew Sachs the Adore. He remained for about 40 years. Silent, not until 2014. However, had disclosed that he had suffered physical harm when it was being filmed. He made a set call, he wasn't kidding, and he was dangerous. The falls, the so-called comedy, and slaps. Sometimes they weren't phony. You would assume this well-known show would have countless edits from behind the scenes that are told with pride, but the quiet is overwhelming. No reunion highlights. No in-depth interviews, hazy recollections, or none at all, not at all. Silence like that doesn't talk her accidentally. It makes reference to something more sinister, something that people still do not wish to recall. Afterward, there's John. He was a national one's treasure. From Fawlty to Monty Python, he was the genius who made fun of Towers. At the system. But he's gone now. At 8-2. From emblem of rebellion to lightning rod for debate. During a live panel in March 2022, his microphone was physically taken away SXSW following his joke on compensation from Attili, asserting that the British have been slaves as well. It was more than just an awkward moment. It drew a distinction between former glory and display humiliation. In 2020, he made fun of those who were angered by calling them pathetic and cancelling culture for failing to advocate for themselves. GB News. His new home is a channel that detractors refer to Britain's version of Fox as. The irony is incisive. The individual who the powerful who were once ridiculed are now their spokesman, and as his reputation shifts, Sado's the public's perception of the show indicate that made him well known. The decline hasn't only hit the show and the people. Itself at one point. Fawlty Towers was chosen as the greatest British television show ever. It was in the year 2000, however, 25 years later, everything appears different. In 2020, the notorious incident in which the Germans were dragged from streaming services due to racist epithets. People who used to laugh now wince. Scholars have begun to refer to the program as a fossil. Critics have ripped up the way it portrayed women. Once regarded as a comic powerhouse, Sibley is now perceived as a nasty parody. Words like bigoted and misogynistic demonstrate more frequently than outstanding or memorable. Additionally, when you include the actual physical mystery on that certain performers endured on set, it gets more difficult to separate pain-induced laughter. What once be regarded as astute, disobedient, and it feels awkward to be untouchable anymore. The jokes remain the same. The world whose and the legacy that remains is one that is crumbling, not simply complex. The cast's quiet, the decline of Cleese, the show's re-evaluation, everything, both of them convey the same narrative.